Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, where using my SKG discount code leads to a 25% off across several products, making a Windows 10 serial key only $16. After the payment, you'll receive the key in your account and all you need to do is to introduce it in your Windows settings and bam! You have an activated system. Well, the RX 6500 XT has been getting a lot of hate since its release. But is it really justifiable? Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco, and welcome to my channel. One of the reasons this card has actually been really hated is due to having only 4GB VRAM, and on top of that, only, and I repeat, only 64-bit bus. So even the lower tier cards, at least the 500 series, usually have 128-bit bus, and in this case we have just 4GB of RAM and on top of that 64-bit bus. Which in 2022 is kind of considered, using user benchmarks words, substandard performance, or in this case, substandard specs. Yeah. And that's not even the worst part, because on top of this, we actually have only 4 PCI Express lanes. So the usual GPUs bring 16 PCI Express lanes, while for example the GPUs like the 6600, the 6600 XT bring only 8 lanes. And usually 8 lanes are more than enough even for a GPU as strong as the 6600 XT, okay? So even using PCI Express 3, 8 lanes will be enough. But AMD actually went nuts and they brought only 4 lanes to the 6500 XT. Only 4 lanes. And if you're using an older PC with just PCI Express 3, for example even a Ryzen 2000 series, which is not that old, you're gonna have a bad time because you will have only PCI Express 3, as you can see in this video, and the performance is quite bad with PCI Express 3. Quite bad. And that's why people are mad, I think. So in this video we'll be comparing the 6500 XT, which is the entry-level card of 2022, versus the 5500 XT, which is the entry-level card of 2019, and we have the RX 580, which is the mythical, the super mega hyper non-dying card, mid-tier 2017. And in a normal situation, the recent cards on the same tier should be always faster. But is it really this scenario that's happening? Let's find out. Today's first game is Gears 5 using the usual DX12 and Ultra settings. As always, the red bars represent the normal results, while the black bars represent supposedly the best scenario for each card. Well, you can immediately notice that at 1080p both the 5500 XT and the 6500 XT deliver considerably higher results than the RX 580 in this game, with the 6500 XT being around 8 FPS over the 5500 XT, as it should be. At 1440p things get a little different, with the performance differences being a lot smaller, but still pending in favor of the 6500 XT, and it is only at 4K that the GPU really suffers due to having only 4GB VRAM and 64-bit bus. But anyway, nobody's gonna use this card for heavy titles at 4K. Now we have Assassin's Creed Valhalla using the X12 and very high settings, and you can see right away that these results are very different from the ones before, with the 6500 XT struggling to get to the RX 580 level and only managing it at 1080p and when using SAM. And take in consideration that I decreased the textures to medium on the 6500 XT to keep it inside the limit, and even doing that, the 6500 XT just gets easily outperformed by the previous generation 5500 XT, which makes no sense. At 1440p things get even worse and the 6500 XT gets even surpassed by the RX 580 while being demolished by the 5500 XT, having lower averages than the 5500 XT in the 1% lows. Just crazy. At 4K things are even worse once again, with the 6500 XT being a complete waste of space and doing even less FPS than the RX 580. But well, I mean, it's 4K. As soon as we pass to Horizon Zero Dawn, we can see once again the 6500 XT being slightly faster than the 5500 XT, but only at 1080p and when overclocked and using SAM, and even there it has lower 1% lows. And it would be way worse if I hadn't decreased the textures for the 5500 XT tests. It almost seems like this is one of the crappiest cards available. Anyway, at 1440p it gets even worse, and now the 5500 XT actually takes the lead, and going to 4K always gets me into a cringe mode, because even with medium textures the 6500 XT just wouldn't load any textures at all, and we were actually seeing plain objects and nothing more. As for the other cards, they do a pretty decent job, I think, taking in consideration we're running ultra settings.
Hidden behind that poster that leads to the real world. We all feel safe in that room. But sometimes something crawls out from behind the poster. And the ones that see it happen freak out.
As for control, it seems one of the two things. Or the RX 580 performs really well here, or the RX 5500 and 6500 XT perform really bad, but I think it's actually the first one. In here, if we didn't use medium textures for the 5500 XT, we would be having blurred textures here and there, while the other cards would be performing extremely well, even with ultra textures due to having 8GB VRAM. As for results, the three cards bring very similar results at 1080p and 1440p, with both the RX 580 and the 5500 XT being a bit faster than the 6500 XT at stock, and at 4K we just get that awesome PowerPoint presentation with any of these GPUs, being the results completely irrelevant in my opinion. But still, the 6500 XT is worse due to way lower VRAM capacity and bus width. In Red Dead Redemption 2 using Vulkan and high settings, we have once again a not so bad outcome, with the 6500 XT actually being really close to the previous cards, but only at 1080p and when using PCI Express 4 and Smart Access Memory, and even there the difference is only 4 average FPS, which is not that relevant. Going to 1440p makes the differences even less noticeable, and even though we decrease the texture's quality to high, on the 6500 XT of course, it barely stays over its predecessor. The RX 580 is considerably slower here in all resolutions and consumes way more power. But, I mean, that's normal, it's a GPU from 2017. Although what's not normal is the fact that an entry-level GPU from 2022 fails to beat an entry-level GPU from 2019, and that makes me sad and angry at the same time. Anyway, let's move on. Forza Horizon 5 is a game where smart access memory makes a huge difference in terms of performance for almost all AMD GPUs, but for my amazement, it did absolutely nothing for the 6500 XT. In fact, it even decreased the FPS numbers. This must be due to the lackluster 4GB VRAM accompanied with only 64-bit buzz, but still, it's a crap. The 2019 5500 XT matches or goes over the 6500 XT once activating SAM, since it gets over 10 average FPS by enabling the feature. At 4K, it gets even worse due to the severe RAM capacity bottleneck, VRAM in this case, that makes the 6500 XT highly unstable in terms of FPS numbers, sometimes going as low as 7. As for the other two cards, both were able to achieve close to 30 average FPS, which is a really good number for a game like Forza Horizon 5 at 4K.
Proceed to customs without undue delay.
Cyberpunk 2077, like Gears 5, is one of the few games where we actually didn't need to decrease the textures to medium or low in order to have proper results. Still, the FPS values are quite disappointing for the 6500 XT that once again gets beaten even by the old RX 580. And by quite a lot if we count in the 1% lows, being the difference even bigger in between the 6500 XT and the 5500 XT. At 1440p, the presented values aren't much different in reality, apart from the considerably 1% lows, the considerably lower 1% lows with the 6500 XT, and at 4K all cards perform like crap. But as they should, since they are entry-level GPUs, and this is Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K.
Can be a little rough. Move around a bit to make sure you didn't break anything.
Now we have Call of Duty Warzone in the orientation mission. Like I always tell you, I test the orientation mission since it is less prone to have a CPU or RAM bottleneck, which happens a lot in a normal gameplay. As for the results, this is one of the most disappointing game results in my opinion. Why? Because this card is actually aimed at esports gaming, and here we see that when cranking settings to the max on the 6500 XT, it is considerably slower than the 5500 XT and even the RX 580, which makes absolutely no sense. Of course, we could decrease the settings and get a performance boost, but that could also be said about the other two cards, so yeah. At 1440p and 4K the difference just gets bigger, and at 1440p it is definitely a game changer, as the 5500 XT can reach around 75 average FPS and the 6500 XT barely manages 50, which is quite a bit far from the minimum case scenario of 60 FPS. Another fail for the 6500 XT. As we move forward in the video, this starts looking like that Simpsons meme where they say, "Stop, he's already dead." On Rainbow Six Siege, the 6500 XT gets a bit down once again, miserably losing even to the old RX 580, and even at 1080p. This while being completely wrecked by the 5500 XT. At higher resolutions like 1440p, the difference is so big that it actually hurts, with the 6500 XT not even reaching the 1% lows values of the RX 580, which is a mid-tier GPU from 2017, I mean, come on.
Brother!
Getting closer to the final line, we have God of War using high settings with original textures used for the 6500 XT. At 1080p, the 6500 XT can actually fare pretty well in this game, this, of course, once overclocked, because at stock settings it was still being owned by the 5500 XT. At 1440p, although the 580 actually has lower 1% lows, it still gets really close to the 6500 XT in averages, with the 5500 XT once again leading the charts, and at 1440p ultra-wide the places get maintained. I must also say that I didn't expect that much from the RX 580 in this game, but it was definitely a good surprise. The last game is Resident Evil Village, and we have some really interesting results. I mean, in this game I did not reduce the texture settings, so all cards were going over the red line in this game, but the 6500 XT was definitely the card that handled the situation poorly. At 1080p we can see how unstable the card was, since we got only 45 average FPS at stock, being it increased to 71 once overclocked and to 78 once using SAM, but still being behind the 5500 XT, which had way more stable results. At 1440p the difference just gets higher, with the 6500 XT still bringing horrible results, being demolished by both the other cards, but while this happened at 1440p, the 4K results weren't much different, but we were running below 30 FPS, so yeah. I'm pretty sure that we could just decrease the textures and get way better results with the 6500 XT, but this is for you to see how much the performance will decrease in situations where this card is VRAM bottlenecked, and those will be a lot. And it would be much worse if I was using PCI Express 3 instead of PCI Express 4, as you can see in the video in the right top corner, or in the top right corner, so yeah, it's a bummer. Let's move on. So guys, here we are in the conclusion, and as you saw, the 6500 XT is a lackluster, completely. If it wasn't for testing, I would not buy this card myself. Like, never, ever, ever, okay? This was a mistake by AMD, and people need to make AMD understand that they won't buy these cards, because if you buy these cards they will keep doing the same mistake, bringing the shitty 4 lanes, the shitty 4 PCI Express lanes, bringing only 4GB VRAM on 2022, where the minimum possible should be at least 6GB. In this case, since we have 64-bit bus, it should be 8GB, which is the minimum recommended, and I mean 4GB is just not enough. Even for esports titles, for some esports titles, even at medium settings in some games, as you saw, the GPU won't have enough VRAM because 4GB just won't cut it in 2022. It's a fact. It is also quite annoying that an entry-level GPU from 2022 costing around $200, which is just a bit below what the RX 580 cost in 2017. The MSRP, I think it was like $249, something like that, but it was just a bit below that, so $200, and it performs even worse than the RX 580 in some scenarios. Obviously, this GPU doesn't have all bad things. One and maybe the only good thing is the power draw, which won't pass 100 watts. Usually it will stay in between 60 and 80 watts, and for the performance this card brings, 60 and 80 watts is really nice. But still, we're talking about a GPU that costs $200, and I would easily, and I repeat easily, get the 5500 XT used, or if I could get a new 5500 XT, 8GB over the 6500 XT, okay? The power draw is a bit higher, but the GPU performance is overall way better, and it has way more VRAM. And if this GPU actually had a version with 8GB VRAM, it would stand way better than it stands right now, but with 4GB VRAM, it just won't cut it, because it's 4GB plus the 64-bit, plus the 4 lanes. It's just like a mix of shit. And a pile of shit is just that, a pile of shit. If you have more shit, it will become an even bigger pile of shit. It won't become better, it just will become worse. Just becomes worse, yes. That's the situation with this card, I think. So my final opinion here is basically, if you can, get the 5500 XT over the 6500 XT, okay? If you can. If you find a used card, even maybe a bit cheaper than the 6500 XT, get the 5500 XT 8GB, or in the worst scenario, or if you find a really cheap RX 580, get the RX 580 over this card, okay? It will consume a lot more power, and we're talking about like more than double the power draw, but it will still perform better overall since it has more VRAM and way more bandwidth. So we're talking about 256-bit bus against the 64-bit bus, okay? This card runs and can be overclocked to 3 GHz. The RX 580 runs at 1400, okay, 1400 MHz, so the 6500 XT runs at more than double the frequency, but also has less than double the physical units, TMUs, ROPs, and so on, and also has less than double bit bus, so it's a trade. Still, I would prefer to have more power draw than to be restrained with only 4 GB VRAM. And the best card in between these three that you can actually pick is the 5500 XT 8 GB. That's what I think. So guys, thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video because that really helps a lot. Thanks a lot for watching one more time, and see you in the next video.